So, upcoming this May, and I know that's a couple of months off, but it'll be 3 years since the final direct-to-video animated film based on the New 52 universe from DC Comics was released. And that was, of course, Justice League Apokolips War. And it is basically looked at and cited as probably one of the best animated films, direct-to-video wise, for DC Comics, the DC Universe that was ever made, especially when it came to the New 52. And honestly, I can't agree more. I mean, what I said in my review about 3 years ago, going on 3 years in May, I stick by. I thought it was very well done. Everybody that's reviewed it here on YouTube and various other places, all feel the same way. I mean, when you look at how the movie is presented and what it builds off of throughout the structure, the continuity structure, if you will, of the New 52 timeline, if you will, you honestly cannot blame, the animators and the story writers for putting in the effort that they did to give us a great finale. No matter how you felt about the New 52, as a whole, to give it this kind of a finale 3 years ago is just incredible. It really is. And obviously they learned from that because they've continued that success with basically the new run of animated films, which I think do have a bit of a connection in some of them to each other, but are completely individualized themselves. Basically their own solo stories with a bit of, like I say, connection, but more based on story elements, from the comics, like graphic novels and everything that had come out in years prior. Some of these stories that they're actually adapting are either original stories or they're based on comic book events that never really got to see the light of day, during the original run. And I appreciate that. I really do. But to me, Apokolips War, in my opinion, set the standard currently in the modern era that if you're going to do some kind of major film that brings in established characters, that goes as far as it did, goes to the extremes that it did, to basically get itself an R rating because of how violent and graphic it was, to me, it set the standard of, how to bring established characters that you wouldn't expect in that kind of an environment, to that kind of atmosphere. It really did. I mean, when I look at something like, let's say, Sonic the Hedgehog, there are elements in the original Saturday morning cartoon that got carried over into the comic, that were inspired by the Saturday morning cartoon, that were taken up a notch in a big, big way. And even when, with the reboot, soft reboot, if you will, occurring as well, there was a lot of elements thrown in there that could, cause a bit of an argument of whether or not something like, adapting, let's say, the Brave New World kind of thing, issues 252 to 256, I believe, that, basically, it basically would cause the argument and debate of whether or not something like that, with everything involved, the restoration of the memories of the previous world and all that, and, basically the effects of what happened, if it would warrant maybe, let's say, an animated adaptation getting a PG-13 rating. That is what a movie like Apokolips War did. It set the standard that you can take these beloved characters and put them in that kind of environment. I mean, everybody looked at, let's say, the Dark Knight Rises, or the Dark Knight adaptation, as well as the recent improved Death of Superman adaptation two-parter. And all of those, as far as I know, were giving PG-13 ratings. You could have gone R. I don't know if they did go R. Hold on for a sec. No, the recent adaptation of the Death of Superman storyline didn't even go R, and they could have. They could have gone R, to really emphasize its adaptation of the original presentation, but they didn't. But like I said, what Justice League, in my opinion, did, more so than the other R-rated movies that came before it, because there were some R-rated movies in the DC animated catalog, and I think still going on now, that were given those ratings, not just based on the story, but based on some situations, like the violence, potential sex and nudity, you name it. But again, going back to Apokolips War, in my opinion, setting the standard. Like I said, you could take something like, let's say, the Return of the Freedom Fighters story arc, which again, like I said, was 252 to 257. Not actually 256, but 257. You could take that arc 252 to 257, and the way it's presented, as I mentioned, with the characters getting the memories back and all that, a la Nicole, and just based on the overall storyline, like, the planet tearing itself apart and everything, and it being the beginning stages of Sonic going into werehog mode, to me, that could potentially set itself up, if adapted into an animated film, for maybe a potential PG-13 rating. And then maybe you look at the final, few issues of the entire story arc, the Panic in the Sky, as it's called, which I think is 84 to 87, 284 to 287. And you could say that warrants maybe a PG-13 rating and all that, based on what you see there, based on the environment and stuff. And I don't think you get a single, you would probably get, as I mentioned, you might get a little bit of a debate of, well, this is Sonic we're talking about. There's no way they would do that. Need I remind you that when they gave Shadow his own game, they didn't rate it E for everyone. They rated it E10. And then afterwards, certain other Sonic games like Unleashed and all that got an E10 rating based on the situations. I mean, Shadow basically getting an E10. There was talk of the fact that it came close to getting a T rating, and that's major right there. That's major right there. But to me, Apokolips War, looking back on it 3 years later, and the impact it's had, truly, in my opinion, opened the door for these kind of things to happen. I mean, you look at, let's say, IDW's Sonic comic, and I know I'm talking a lot about Sonic here, but I'm giving examples based on some of the stories they've already come out with. And, for example, you have the Metal Virus, the Zombot arc that they did. You can't tell me that would not lend itself to a PG-13 rating. I mean, you could also look at the Imposter Syndrome arc. The 4-part miniseries that introduced Surge and Kit, as well as the overall story itself, especially leading into the conclusion. And you can't tell me none of that wouldn't warrant a PG-13 rating, because it would. Especially when you look at, I guess you could say metaphorically, the direction storyline-wise they were going with Surge, if you will. So yeah, you cannot tell me that would not warrant, it would not warrant maybe a PG-13 rating. I mean, you look at even IDW's Ninja Turtles, the Last Ronin story, and everything. You look at, some of the stories they're doing now and such. And you cannot tell me that if they wanted to do direct-to-video movies, animated-wise, based on any of that they wouldn't warrant those to be a PG-13 rating. I mean, Rise of the Ninja Turtles, the movie, was given a PG rating, right? It could have been easily given a PG-13 rating. That's a fact, if they wanted to. But the stories, getting back to what I was saying, the stories in the IDW TMNT, those definitely, in my opinion, lend themselves, no doubt, lend themselves to basically, straight up animated adaptations that could warrant PG-13, maybe R ratings, if you will. I mean, The Last Ronin, if they wanted to adapt that, that's an R rating right there, waiting to happen. There's no getting around it. There's no getting around it. They want to adapt, the Armageddon game, depending on how it structures itself, and everything throughout, because it's a long arc from what I understand. That could fall under the pretense of a PG-13 rating or an R rating too, depending on, how violent, complicated, mature, it ends up getting. The thing is, to me, when I look at Apokolips War, knowing that this was the finale to, give a closure overall on the New 52 universe, comic and movie adaptation, like I said, you couldn't ask for a more perfect adaptation, adaptation and closure to that arc than what we got. You can't ask for anything better. Not only can you not ask for anything better, but it definitely succeeded in showing that it not only warranted, but earned that R rating. There is no doubt about that. There is no doubt about that. So, to me, I still stand, like I said earlier, on what I said in my original review. And to me, I think it set the table. It really did. I mean, you look at even pre-Sonic reboot in Archie Comics, and you have the freaking Mecha Sally arc. As much as I hate that arc, and I do, I hate it because of what they did to Sally, and I'm not alone in that. I mean, I'll admit they had some good moments, as I've mentioned before. The execution, the plan that was blueprinted and written out, looked good on paper. But the execution, it just fell flat. Let's be honest, it fell flat. But like I said, you have something like that potentially for an adaptation maybe in the future, and that to me could warrant a PG-13 rating. There's no getting around that. But overall, to me, going on 3 years, 2.5 years, 3 years later, I have to say that Justice League Apokolips War not only showed, how you can adapt a story arc, original or not, perfectly, and have it warrant and earn its status of an R rating or a certain MPA rating. Not only did it show that, but it set the standard, in my opinion, for anybody else. Not just DC, but Marvel, Image, if you will, IDW, Dark Horse, all that. All of them out there. It set the standard of how you could do an animated adaptation, movie-wise, based on maybe, certain characters with an original story, or based on certain established stories, and do it in a way that will showcase why it warrants and needs and should earn its status of a certain MP rating it gets. And I can't say any more than that. But let me know what your guys' thoughts are. Let me know what your thoughts were when you first saw Justice League Apokolips War. What did you think about it? And do you think it did set the standard for future adaptations of, animation-wise, movie-wise, based on certain story arcs or original ideas, featuring established characters that could be, put into a scenario to where if a movie adaptation was done, it would definitely warrant or showcase, why it warrants and needs to have a certain rating. Let me know what your thoughts are down below. Comment if you like. Love to hear from each and every one of you. You will get an audio podcast version of this later on. But guys, let me know what your thoughts are. And until then, I'll talk to y'all later.